Soloveitchik. Yesterday was the yahrzeit of Reb Shai Lakir Steer, and yesterday the broadcast was sponsored by Reb Benzi Bench and his family. Lezechanishus Reb Shai ben Reb Moshe, his Phyllis and Shemaim on behalf of us, his Stadlis and Shemaim on behalf of us all should be very much sliach, and we should all have a shefa bracha tzlacha from Reb Shai ben Reb Moshe. Today is the yahrzeit of the Beis Halevi, and the most famous story that I remember with the Beis Halevi is that someone came to ask. I think people mistakenly say this story over with Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, but could be I'm mistakenly saying it over in the name of the Beis Halevi, where somebody came to the Beis Halevi on Erev Pesach and asked if he could be Mekayim the mitzvah of Dalit Koises with milk. And the Beis Halevi gave him a huge amount of money, way more than what it would cost to buy wine with, because he didn't have wine. So when the Beis Halevi was asked, why did you give him so much money? Wine doesn't cost nearly that amount of money. He says, well, if a guy wants to use milk for a dollar kosher, he has no meat for Yom Tov either. So I had to give him enough money, sai for the dollar kosher and sai for the meat. But being that I'm not sure if this story happened to Beis Halevi or with Reb Chaim, I'm going to say over another story that I'm not sure if it happened with the Beis Halevi. That was the Beis Halevi was once going to raise money. He was travel, maybe he wasn't raising money, but he had to travel from city to city on some type of mission. And one morning he found himself davening shachris in a Hasidic shtibel. And after davening, they bring out l'chaim and they bring out leikach, and there's a whole party. And he's asking the olim, what's going on? What's the simcha? So they told him, what do you mean? It's a Hacham Plotch Rebbe's yahrzeit. He says, I don't understand. But you see them when there's a yahrzeit, you party? That's so strange. Because by us, when there's a yahrzeit, we learn Mishnayos, we say Kaddish, and we don't listen to music, and we sit the Kovid Rosh, Avelos, and a new party, it's Chabad Zach. But now that I think about it, the same kasha that I have on this situation, really you can have on the Dor Day, on the Dor Midbar. Because when they thought originally that Moshe Rabbeinu died, it says Vayakum L'Tzachik, they party. Yet when Moshe Rabbeinu really died, they sat Bavelis 30 days. So how did the Dor Day? How did they know when to party and when to sit Bavelis? Teretz is Pashas of the Beis Halevi. When did they party when Moshe Rabbeinu died? That was before Matan Torah. So Moshe Rabbeinu was blows Gevei Rebbe. He made Nissim, he made Mopsim, he made the Tasar Malchus, he made Kisham. So no, a Rebbe was a vech. You can make a party. But after Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu did a Rosh Hashiva. A Rosh Hashiva is a vech. So that's the story that I heard. That I'm not sure if it was true. He also have Dimi Omar. Maisa Beriva Achas. There was a story with a girl. Achas, the Hisloi, in a city called Hisloi. Shahaisa Machbedes as a bias. She was sweeping the floor. I assume she was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor. And a big dog jumped on her from behind. Verova Kelev Kufri Macharel. Rashi's Kolovim Gedolim, Kelev Kufri, these big dogs, Shetzaden Bond Chayes, that you use to capture animals with, for hunting. So she was raped literally by a dog. Vehechshira Rabbi Lekahuna. And Rabbi said that she's mutter to marry a kohen. In other words, she does not become a zayna because of the bia that she had with the dog. Amar Shmuel ula kohen gadol. Even for a kohen gadol, meaning she's not even considered a be'ula. She's not even considered a be'ula. Bimei Rebbe, practically more, kohen gadol mi hava. What do you mean that Shmuel is saying that Rebbe was mater her for a kohen gadol? There were no kohen gadol in the days of Rebbe. So this is an interesting kasha, because on Amr Aleph, we also quoted from Rav that Rav said it's mutter to marry a kohen gadol. Right? Amr Rav Nivela Shleika Darka. I'm sorry, it's Tula Lakuna, and we learned that plus kohen gadol. So why is it when Rav and Amr Aleph addressed the halacha, Legabe Kahuna Gedola, nobody jumped on him? Yet over here, when Shmuel said that Rebbe was matter at Kahuna Gedola, Shmuel asked, mean, the Gemara asked, "May Rabbi Kohen Gadol we have a?" But the Torah is portion. Amud Aleph, Rav was just stating halacha. Often we discuss halachas that aren't again nowadays, but in another base we're learning now, we have a story that actually occurred, and Rabbi said this is mutar l'kohen gadol. If it's halacha l'maisa, Rabbi should pass on halacha l'maisa, and it's not relevant to kohen gadol.
The beautiful story I've seen is weak because when all is said and done, we see that the Tanakh and the Amoraim.
You scared me for a second. Okay, you're focusing on the psak, not on the story.
On the
Yes.
Psak.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. It's an awful story, but we see that the Tanakh and the Amoraim spoke about the Beis Hamikdash and Mashiach as if it's going to happen. As if it's happening.
I hear, but it's still when you're passing something halacha l'maisa, the Gemara holds us for a kasha. If you pass on halacha l'maisa, if there's no kohen gadol around right now to discuss about.
Bar the movie.
I hear. So Zok to Gemara, El Ru'uy l'kohen gadol. What Shmuel meant to say is that Rabbi Paskin that Ru'uy l'kohen gadol l'chaim Jesus, because tomorrow there will be. Amalei Rava mipirkin l'Ravashi. So we know how Milsa the Amar Rabbanan ain't nus l'behem. So if this story illustrates that the bia of a dog does not make this woman into a zayna, nor would it make this woman into a ba'ula. If it wouldn't make a woman into a ba'ula, that's of course according to the shita in the Tanoim that a boigris, that was the shita of our mayor, the first time in our Mishnah, that a boigris is asher kohen gadol, but via shaloi kedarka is not called a ba'ula. And ain't nus l'behem. So how do you know ain't nus l'behem? Tichsiv. It says in the pasuk, Leisavi esnan zayna umechir kelav. These are two types of animals that would be usher to be brought as a carbon. So let's say a person has a sheep. Where does the sheep come from? A woman was a zayna, and she charged for her services. What was her charge? Her charge was a sheep. So if there's a woman, a zayna, decides that she wants to bring a carbon, and she got a sheep as payment for znos, that animal is not allowed to be brought for a carbon. Mechir kelav, somebody owns a dog, and he does a barter with somebody. I'll give you my dog if you give me your sheep. That sheep that you receive as a barter for a dog may not be brought as a carbon. Utnan, we learned. What about the opposite? What if it was eslan kelev umechir zoyna? What if it's eslan kelev? What is eslan kelev? Rashi says, I tell a zoyna, be mezana with my dog, and I will pay you a sheep. So if a woman gets a sheep because she's mezana with someone's dog, that's mutter to be brought as a carbon. Or mechir zoyna. If someone swaps a zoyna for a dog, I'm not sure how that swap would work.
You're going to donate
You want to donate the sheep? No, you swap the zoyna for a sheep, so you're not allowed to donate the sheep as a carbon. So these two animals, the esnan kelav and the mechir zoyna, are mutter. Why? Shenemar gam shneim. It says Hayavas Hashem gam shneim, referring to esnan kelav and mechir zoyna. So the Torah is telling us shnayim v'lo arba. There is only two in this set that we're answering, not four. So therefore, only the esnan zoyna and the mechir kelav and the esnan kelav would not be usher. So you see clearly that the Torah does not consider the bia that this zoyna has with a kelav the bia is nos, and that's why the kelav, the esnan for it, is going to be mutter to be brought as a carbon. So David's asking why. It seems like it's strictly exeris hakosav. I mean, it's hard. The bia is mechayiv somebody with skila. Why wouldn't it be considered bia snus? I don't know the answer. It seems like the whole thing is based on this pasuk, which is exeris hakosav. Tanu Rabbanim. What happens about adusas atzmai umafudas atzmai? A kohen gadol himself is ma'anas a woman, or a Kohen Gadol himself is mefata a woman. So lo yisa, he shouldn't marry this woman. She's a beula. V'im nasa nasa. But if he married her, it's considered married. Lagabe, what halacha is it considered married? We'll see soon, because the Gemara is going to tell us in a second. He still has to give her a get. She's a beula, but the Gemara is going to tell us Lagabe what is it relevant that it's considered a marriage. What about anusas chaveri or mafutas chaveri? So this is a true beula. Lo yisa, surely a kohen gadol can't marry such a woman. And v'im nasa. What if he married this woman and had a child? The blood will be a halal because the kohen gadol married a beula. A blood kosher, the blood will be kosher. Of course, you still have to give a get, but the blood will be kosher. So let's see what this interesting brisa means. Im nasa nasa. Anusas atzmai umfutas atzmai. He's not allowed to marry her because she is a beula. But if he married her, she's considered married. Amar afuna amarav. Umaytzi beget. He still has to be mighty with a get because it says ki besula me'ama v'ikachisha. This woman is not a besula. So what does it mean? It's a good marriage. We don't let him stay married to her. Amar Yaakov to tell you the halacha is if someone is ma'anas a woman, he has to pay a knas, and on top of that he has to marry her. By mafuta, if he decides to marry her, then he doesn't have to pay the knas. He only has to pay the knas if he doesn't decide to marry her. So let's say this kohen gadol was mefata a woman, and he decides to marry her. He won't have to pay knas, so he can marry her, and then he'll be forced to give her a get, but he can get out of paying knas. So that's when it says nasa nasa. All it means is that he won't have to pay a knas if this was a mefuta. So Tosfos asks, "Im Torah Tosfos, the chiven the boy get if you're forcing him to give a get, the isla ksuba kamay alman la kohen gadol, and therefore he would have to pay her a ksuba because even if a kohen gadol marries an almana, he's mechuyev to pay her a ksuba when he divorces her. The isla ksuba. What's the difference if he doesn't pay a knas because he didn't? Because what the doctor say doesn't pay a knas because he does marry her, he's gonna have to pay ksuba or yesh ksuba. Umalik knas malik ksuba. Who cares what the phrase is, what the identification is for his payment? Either way, he's paying a lot of money. I'm sorry. No, because if he marries this woman who he was mefata, he doesn't have to pay the knas. Only if he doesn't marry her. But if he's gonna have to pay her regardless, so then why is it a big deal? So Amari did not kamina in machal ksuba. What if she was moichel ksuba? If she was moichel ksuba, then he wouldn't have to pay knas. Even if she wasn't moichel ksuba, the loy mishal mina edis kedin knas. When you pay knas and you give land, you have to give the best land. But when you pay ksuba, you only have to give ziburish the worst land. So that's another difference.
Doesn't the knas go to the father as opposed to the woman?
I'm not sure. We have to look at the pasuk. I mean, Rashi only quotes the giver, not the taker. It doesn't quote the whole pasuk. So I don't have the pasuk here. I don't have the chumash we have. Oh, we do have a chumash. I'll look it up. It's the Varam Chavez. The Varam Chavez. Okay, let's see where we are here. So by Usafasa, it says he gives a chamitzim kesef l'shila isha, but this is by Inoi. What about by Pitoi? This is speaking by Nes, right? Chayim seish nar b'sula shlo yasa Usafasa v'shachar nimo v'nimtzo. Let's see what it says on Pasuk of Ches. I don't know. This doesn't say anything here. It says La Via Naira chamishu kasa v'lo shila isha. But this is going on a ma'anis. is not going on the fatwa. I'm not sure.
I seem to remember he has to give the father like 50 shekel kesef.
Well, that's the honest. It says, yeah, chamishim kosev. The nosma is a shoyf female avin ayr chamishim kosev, but this is going on in ma'anis. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good order. Okay, so let's see the Gemara right. Amar Rav Gviya, we bake still. Amar l'shmaitza kamei de Rav Ashi. I said this halacha over to Rav Ashi that in nasa means that he still has to give a get. He just that he doesn't pay knas. Amar Lei, so he told me back. But Rav Rabbi Yochanan, the Amri Tavayu, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan both agreed that boigris umukaseitz lo yisa. A boigris and a mukaseitz, a kohen gadol may not marry. Vim nasa nasi. But if he marries her, he could stay married to her. So what do you see from that? Now she's allowed to keep her. He doesn't have to divorce her at all. Alma, what do you see from here? That soif eliyos boigris tachta. Soif eliyos mukaseitz tachta. You see, you see that since anyway she's going to become a beula when she's married to the kohen, so we don't care about the mukaseitz. We don't care about the boikers. Rashi says mukaseitz taktav claim is soifali boyaloi will avid b'sulah. Anyway, she's going to lose her b'sulah. So since she's anyway going to lose her b'sulah, the fact that she was a mukaseitz or a boikers, sure, he's not allowed to marry her. But once he married her, it's not a problem. Same thing with mukaseitz. Soifali is bula taktav. The nasa the katani legamri kav. The nasa means the mutter lakaima. He wasn't allowed to marry this woman. But once he did, he's allowed to stay married to her. The whole problem is that she was nivala to him, and anyway she's going to be nivala to him. So Hachanami, here you should say the same thing. Even though he was ma'anaser, once he marries her, he should be able to stay with her because anyway she's going to become nivelas tachto. The Gemara bleib shver. However, the Ritva answers that there's a very big difference between a woman who's a boigris and a woman who's a mukaseitz versus a woman who was mizana. One was a defilement and one wasn't, and therefore, even though by a boigris and by a mukaseitz we would let the kohen gadol remain married to the woman because we're going to say anyway, soifel lias boigris tachtov. Eventually, she's not going to be a basula anymore anyway. But if it was done through a defilement such as a znus, then everybody would agree that he has to give her a get, and the nasa here must mean that he doesn't have to take nas. That was the second half of the brayso that we just quoted. There bim nasa, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Eimer hablat halal, hablat kosher. So really the shaila is, what is the isser for a kohen gadol to marry a bu'ula, anusas chaveret? In the case where there's not a problem of signing, it's kim besula me'ama b'garisha. It's a nasei. It's not a license. So Amar Avuna Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that the vlad is a cholol. The Chein Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov the vlad is a chol. Ika the Amri. There are those who say Amar Avuna Amar Rav. My time of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. What's the reasoning? Why does Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov consider the child a cholol if a kohen gadol illegally marries a woman who's a bula? So the Gemara is like Rabbi Elazar, he holds like Rabbi Elazar. Now who's Rabbi Elazar? The famous shita that we don't pass like that Rabbi Elazar holds that upon the Habala Pnuya Asazayna. Right? That was that Toshus Shalom we had, who said that we don't pass like that. It's a shita shachid, and therefore nowadays a woman who had relations, like a woman a Balas Shuba who had relations only with a Jewish person, wouldn't be a Zayna, would be able to marry a kohen. Because if she's a Zayna, she's usher for the kohen gadol to marry with a lav, and therefore the vlad's a chalal, because it says almanog ushava chalol azoyis el lo yikach. There's a lav. If there's a lav prohibiting a kohen gadol from marrying this woman, then any iser lav that is violated by a kohen when he's marrying a woman, the child is going to be a chalal. But that's simply not true. Are you going to tell me that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds like Rabbi Elazar? We know there's a rule that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov didn't speak often, but when he spoke, we know it was perfect. So we would for sure pass like him. Yet we don't pass like Rabbi Elazar. We hold the vlad is not a mamzer. So therefore, there must be another explanation for the shita for Rabbi ben Yaakov. Kasha. Rabbi Ashi says, I will tell you, Pshat in Rabbi ben Yaakov, why he makes the Vlad Chalal, even if it's the Kohen marrying a Ba'ula, which is only an Isra say. Because the Machlokes is, B'yesh Chalal Mechayv Esei. That's precisely what the Machlokes is. Maybe even if there's no lav, even if it's only an essay of Kiyim B'sulam Mayam Vikachisha, but if the Kohen Gadol violates that, maybe that will also make a child a Chalal. Rabbi ben Yaakov have a Yesh Chalal Mechayv Esei, and that's why he holds that if a Kohen Gadol marries Anusas Chaveroi, the child's a Chalal. Rabbi Nisraver ain't Chalal Mechayv Esei. My time is Rabbi ben Yaakov. What is the Svar of Rabbi ben Yaakov to say that an Isra Asay Kim B'sulam Mayam Vikachisha will also net a Chalal? The Chsiv, it says in the pasuk, Almana ugerusha v'chalala zayna eseda lo yikach. This is all referring to a kohen gadol, and then it says Kiyim b'sulam me'ama v'ikach isha. So the Almana, the gerusha, the chalala zayna, those are with a lav, but the bu'ula is only in a say Kiyim b'sulam me'ama v'ikach isha. But the pasuk at the end says v'lo yichal zayroi bi'amoy ki ani Hashem ekadsha. So at the end of the whole parsha of Kahuna, the Torah finishes off by saying v'lo yichal zayroi bi'amoy akulu. So you see that all of these prior violations mentioned, whether they're an Isra say, whether they're an Isra Loisha, regardless, it will create a Chilul Zara. Akulu. So that's how Rabbi ben Yaakov means that when the Torah says at the end of V'lo Yichal Zara, it's telling you don't make a chalal out of your children, meaning all of the previous things that we discussed would make your child into a chalal. Toys here asks if you learn like Rabbi ben Yaakov that V'lo Yichal Zara Ba'ama was going on all the previous violations, to tell you that all the previous violations would net in a chalal, lo yachal is a lav in and of itself. So according to Rabbi Yaakov, even a bu'ula, the bu'ula ends up being a loisasa. Right? That's the small little toishvis beside us. So pasha the kasha. Chalal mechayv is a tema. Even the lo yachal koin nami abu'ula the Rabbi Yaakov. He wants to say that lo yachal is even going on the Isra say, and to tell you that an Isra say would lead to a chalal. Well, then you have a lav there. Imkein in zechayv esay greater. So Toshis bleibt fair. It's a moment of kasha. A small little Toshis, yeah. It's a beautiful kasha. So Zok Gemara, that's the svar of Rabbi ben Yaakov. Rabbanon, who holds that the halal, lo zare, is not going back on the Isser Asay of Kiyam B'sulam Yamav, Ela Hifsik Inim. It says Almana Grusha v'Chalal Zayna as Ela Lo Yikach. So that makes a big red line in the sand between the Chayve Lavin and the Chayve Asay. So even though the Yichal Zari B'Amav is after the Chayve Asay, we say it goes back, logically it'll go back on the Chayve Loshasa that are before this Ela Lo Yikach. Rabbi ben Yaakov Amar, Ela is not coming to tell you that there's no halal from the Kiyim B'Sulam Yamav. Ela is teaching you a whole different halacha, Lamute Nida. What if a Kohen has bia with his own wife who's a nida? That's a severe isser. Nevertheless, the child is not a chalal. Come on, period. So that's the end of the sugya. We have a machlokes if there is a child a chalal, if there's only an isser asay. Zok the Gemara, Kaman Oslo Hodatani. We're going to quote a brisa, and we're going to ask you to tell us who is the Tana of this brisa. Zok the Gemara. It says as follows: Me'ela ata oisa chalol. From these you make a chalol. V'yata oisa chalol minida. All of these almana grusha v'chalol azayin is elo yikach. The product of such a union will be a chalol, but not a nida. Come on, who would that be like? It would be Rabbi ben Yaakov, because we just said from Rabbi ben Yaakov that only the nida is excluded from the halacha of chalol. If in fact that lo yichal zari b'amav is going back on all of the previous halachas, side the lo yikachs of almana grusha and chalal zayna, and as well on the Isra say, then it should have said as lo yikach after the Isra say, not in between the Isra say and the Isra say. So Dr. Markasha, no, it's a kasha. Tanu Rabban, achoisoy arusa. The halach is a kohen may not be metama for a mace except for a small set of people, and one of the people is v'lachoisoi habesula hakaroi ba'ilov Asher lehoisel ish lo yitamo. This is a very important pasuk the Gemara is going to dissect now. One of the women that a kohen is allowed to be matama himself for, and there are those shittas in the Rishonim where you could force him to be matama. So stop saying he's allowed to be matama. He's mechuyev to be matama. Is v'lachoisei habesula hakaroi va'elav asher lo hoisel ish lo yitamo. That's a very good question. I don't know. Almona ugrusha v'chalol zoyna. It says sham, so it would be vayikra chaval. Vayikra chaval. So almona ugrusha. There's a parsha of who a kohen could marry, and then there's a separate parsha that discusses can a kohen become tamei. So it says kim lachash absula karev love lo yitam. So zok the Gemara. Reb Meir Reb Yehuda Aimer metamela. Achoyse arusa, because it says lachash absula karev love. Does she qualify? So Mary Yehuda holds that the achoyse is only in Arusha, not in the Suah. She is considered the achoyse that the Torah is mater or is machayev the kohen to become tummy for. If Yosy Shimon ain't metamela, he's not allowed to be metamela for her. The Gemara is going to dash in the pasuk and show where this comes from. How about anusa mafuta? What if he has a sister, a kohen who has a sister that was either an anusa or a mafuta? Will he be metama to her? It says asher lehoisel ish. Will he be metama to her? So the halacha is divrei akoil ein metamela because she was hoisel ish. What about mukas eitz? Ein metamela divrei Rab Shimon. Mukas eitz is going to be a shaila. Is it called asher hoisel ish? She's a mukas eitz. She wasn't with the ish. She was with an eitz. So Rab Shimon is machmer, and Rab Shimon says even a mukas eitz, he would not be able to be metamer for her. Divrei Rab Shimon.
When she just sits there and does nothing, right?
I'm sorry.
You could say
Mukas means no. Something was some foreign object was stuck inside her. So how Rab Shimon Omer? Rab Shimon said, why does Rab Shimon disqualify a mukas eitz from being able to be metama to her if she's a kohen sister? Because he held a real kohen gadol metamala, a girl who's such a basula that she could even marry a kohen gadol. That's a girl who a kohen would be able to be metama for her if she was his sister. She ain't a kohen gadol, but a mukas eitz who's not allowed to marry a kohen gadol, according to Rab Shimon. Remember, in our Mishnah, it was only Rab Shimon who said that a mukas eitz may not marry a kohen gadol. Ein metamala. Uboigris, what about a boigris? Metamala divrei kol adam. Everybody agrees that even though a boigris cannot marry a kohen gadol, according to Reb Meir in the Mishnah, nevertheless, everybody agrees that if a kohen has a sister who's a boigris or older and she died, that the kohen's going to be metama for her.
why doesn't that show us that the rule does not apply?
So let's go through the drush. So the Gemara is going to go through the drush item by item. My timer, Reb Meir for Rabbi Yehuda. What is this for Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a choisai, a rusa, you could be metama for? The doshach, it says v'lachoisai habesula. It says besula. Prat l'anusa umufuta. That will say that in the nusa and the mafuta you could not be metama for. Yachol shani moitzi af mukas. You might think that a mukas eitz you can also not be metama for because she's not a basula. Talmud loymer shaloi hoisala ish. When do we say basulim is a problem, is necessary in order for him to be metama to her? That's if it's from a man. Mishav yasai deish. Yotazu, a mukas eitz is not excluded. You know why? Sheinav yasai deish. She didn't become a ba'ula through being with a man. Therefore, you'll still be metama for her. Hakraiva, right? It says b'sula. Hakraiva, I love it. So what does hakraiva tell you? L'rabbi harusa. From the word hakraiva, this is the key. From the word hakraiva tells us that a woman who's arusa is still considered kraiva to you, and therefore the kohen can be metama for his sister who's an arusa. Elov l'rabbi haboigris, to tell you that a boigris as well, which everybody agrees, a boigris as well, a kohen will be metama for his sister. Frank Gemara, halamalikra. Why would I need a pasuk to tell you that you could be metama for your sister who's a boigris? For Amar Reb Meir, we learned yesterday, Reb Meir learned that the baseline is, if it said besula as a baseline, the word besula as a baseline means I feel a mixus besula mashma, right? Remember, we learned it says who isha besula yikach, and the Gemara said according to Reb Meir, if it said the word besula alone, a boigris would be included in the word besula, because besula means only a partial besula. But then it says bivesula, the Torah adds that extra syllable, or actually besula, it says the extra yud at the end. That tells us that she needs to be a full basula, but that's like a manga kohen. But the word basula as it is even includes a boigris. So if the word basula is based on includes the boigris, why do I need a special pasuk over here? Elov the rabbis of boigris.
Did you speak to all or
No.
this
How that works?
extra-
No. So more Yitzchak. You still need the word elov. I would have thought you learned basula from there, where there is Rashi learns it's from a naira basula, it's from Ma'anis. Tosfos learns it's from an oinzim l'kohen gadol. Mehasam mala hala naira avkan naira, just like over there it means for sure a naira. So too over here it means a naira. Zok the Gemara kamash malon that it doesn't have to be a naira, even a boigris is acceptable. That you could be matama for her. Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Shimon said that your sister who's an arusa, you cannot be matama for her if you're a kohen. So Darshi Hachi, they darshan the pasuk a little differently. Alachai say basula prat lanusa, umafuta umukaseitz. Achai say basula says saya an anusa, saya mafuta, and saya mukaseitz. You will not be a kohen will not be matama for her sister in such a condition. Asher lo'hoisa prat la'arusa. That even says that on arusa you can't be matama for, and this is the side of the machlokes. Hakroiva l'rabis arusas in the skarsh. If his sister was an arusa, he cannot be matama for her. But if she gets divorced from the ersin and now she comes back to her father's home, even if Shimon agrees that a kohen would be matama for such a sister. Elov l'rabis is a boigris, which is the same as we had in Reb Meir. A boigris, in fact, you would be matama for, a kohen would be matama for a sister. Hakroiva l'rabis. So now the Gemara is going to go back. Hakroiva l'rabis arusas in the skarsh. The way Reb Shimon learned it, the word akroiv in the pasuk tells us that even though if one has a sister who's an arusa, he won't be matama for her. But if she gets divorced, now he'll be matama for her. Frankly, Gemara, how could you say that? The Amar Reb Shimon said, and she's a grusha. And if she's a grusha, even though she's only a grusha in the erison, she surely couldn't marry kohen gadol. So how is it that Reb Shimon holds that you could be matama for a sister who's an arusa and then got divorced? The Gemara Shani Hasam, the Rabbi Rachman Akraiva. Sure, there's a normal rule that anyone who's roy for kohen gadol, such a person, a kohen would be matama to her if she was his sister. But there's a special word Akraiva to tell you that this is an exception, and the rusas and the skarsha, the kohen would be matama for. In fact, Gemara Ihachi mukas eitz nami. If you say it's all totally in who a kohen gadol can marry, but you have a pasuk of kroiva to take away from that rule, well, then mukas eitz also we should say could be matama for her, even though she can't marry a kohen gadol, because just like you use kroiva to make an exception for a rusas and a garsha, use kroiva to make an exception for mukas eitz. Zok to Gemara, no. So Yachi mukas eitz nami rabbi kroiva. We only have one word. We have one riboy. So we could only take one item out of the rule and say that you'll be matama for her, even though she's also for kohen gadol. I'm sorry. Kroiva? Kroiva was l'rabis arusas and asgarsha. No, because the other words, v'lachoisa basula is prat lanusa mafuta. That's because she's not a basula. That's not a ribui. That's because she's technically not a basula. But a kroiva is more of a vague term, so that we apply to it. Let me just finish the line of the Gemara. So if you have one ribui and one exception to say this woman, although she's also for kohen gadol, you can still be matama for her. Why did you pick the arusas and the sgarsha and not the mukas eitz? So there's an obvious difference. A mukas eitz, there was something physically changed in her body. That's why it's more mustaber to say that you won't be matama for her. A woman who was a rusa in the sgarsha, nothing happened to her body. She was a rusa. The erison broke off through the gershon, and therefore we say you could be matama. What do you think?
Or you can also say spor fakir.
That's why we have the Gemara to tell us. That's why we have the Gemara to tell us the story. We have listen. Yeah.
Okay. Isn't the limud that comes to exclude different than a limud that comes to include? A limud that comes to exclude, you're always going to be excluding all kinds of things. whenever it says ish or whatever it says you're allowed to do something, whenever it says you're allowed to something excluded, then a bunch of things are excluded with this one word.
I think that's what Moti was alluding to, and that is that if it says v'lachoisa ha-basula, so sure that could be many things. Anyone who's not a basula, but hakroiva is a vague word, just because of a riboy. So then we could only use it for one item because it's only because of the extra word. It's not hakroiva doesn't tell you mukaseitz yes, mukaseitz no. Hakroiva doesn't say meguresh yes, meguresh no. It's just an extra riboy. So let's see the Gemara about it. Now on Amar Aleph, there was Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon on one team who said that on Arusa you cannot be matama for. There was a Rabbi Meir on the other team who said on Arusa you could be matama for. But when it came to mukaseitz, Rabbi Yosy went silent. Right? If you go back to Amar Aleph and you look at the Brisa, look what it says over here. It says mukaseitz. That was referring to the Tanakama. Actually, let's go further up to the Brisa. If we go back up to the Brisa, Tanu Rabbanan. So up until now, Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Shimon were on the same team. Now it's only Rabbi Shimon who said that a mukaseitz ain't matamala. Rabbi Yosy seems to agree that a mukaseitz matamala, like the Tanakama, like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says over here, the Gemara addresses that. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yosy, when it came to mukaseitz, he split up with Rabbi Shimon and he disagrees with Rabbi Shimon and he holds that a mukaseitz the kohen would be matama for. Michlal, the mukaseitz, Rabbi Meir's shvila. It must be that Rabbi Yosy agrees to Rabbi Meir that a mukaseitz, the kohen would be matama to a sister who's a mukaseitz. Minalei, how does he know that? The Gemara, he'll learn it from loy hoysel ish. And in fact, a mukaseitz was not loy hoysel ish. Correct the Gemara, va'afikte. According to Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Shimon, we already used asher loy hoysa to say that on arusa, you can't be matama for. So the Gemara, asher loy hoysa ish, the three words loy hoysa ish, we can learn two things out of. Chad miloy hoysa, one you learn from loy hoysa, which is an arusa, and mila ish we learn dafka abuula, not a mukaseitz. Elav l'rabas abayis. Everybody learns. Reb Meir, Reb Shimon, they all learn that Elav tells you that your sister Abayis, a kohen will be matama for a sister Abayis. Frank the Gemara, if you remember, Reb Shimon took the opposite perspective earlier. Reb Shimon besula shlema mashma. The default of the word besula means a complete besula. So if that's what the default of the word means, then it says he could only be matama v'lachoisei besula hakroy ve'elav. A besula means a pure besula, so therefore a kohen should not be able to be matama to a sister who's a boygus. Zok Gemara, where do you think Reb Shimon got it from in our Mishnah that the word besula by default means besula shalema? Nami hasam mehacha. It's from here that he learned that the word besula alone means a pure besula. Why? The Dorashachi, this is what he figured to himself. Mida elav l'rabis haboykris. We needed a pasuk of elav to include boykris. That means that the word basula by itself, the Torah, by telling us that the word elav, which we use to be my boygris, the Torah is telling us that if it wouldn't have said elav, you would have thought that a boygris, a kohen, couldn't be matama for. So that's proof positive that the Torah perceives the word basula as meaning a full basula, excluding a boygris. Mechlal the basula shleima mashma. He's talking more about it. Tanya Reb Shimon ben Yochi Omer. Reb Shimon ben Yochi said, if a woman became a Giyaris when she was less than 3 years old, and one day she could even marry a kohen because she's not called a Be'ula, but like we said, the bia of a woman less than 3 years old is not even a bia. Where do we know this from? Shenemar, it says by the Midyanim, when Klal Yisrael attacked the Midyanim after the Maisa of Zimri, after the Eitz of Bilam HaRasha, it says, "V'chalataf b'noshim asher lo yadu mishkav zocher hachayu lochem." It says in the pasuk that all of the women that were so young that they could not have had bia, or that they didn't have bia, you could let them stay alive. And the Gemara assumes hachayu lochem means you could marry them. Who was in that group? Pinchas the Kohen Gadol was amongst the group who the Torah says hachayu lochem. So you have a raya that these women, since they became Jewish when they were less than 3 years old, they are even mutter to marry a kohen gadol. V'Rabbanan,
Didn't go out to war.
so the Gemara is assuming he means for all of Klal Yisrael, everyone there. Frank Gemara v'Rabbanan. What about the Rabbanan who disagree with this and who hold that even if she became a Geyaris when she was less than 3 years old, she's still also a kohen gadol? It means lachem la'avadim u'l'shvachis. It didn't mean lachem you can marry them. It means lachem you can keep them as avadim u'shvachis. Otherwise, you'd have to kill them. Correct. The Gemara ihachi v'ashala shalom v'yom echad nami. If you're going to say that it's li avadim u'l'shvachis, then zok Rashi ihachi afilu bas gimel shalom nami l'skasher l'Rab Shimon. They should also, even older girls should be kosher. U'bilvad sheloi tehei nevelas. The pasuk seems to be only makbid that she shouldn't be nevelas. And if it's only about avadim u'shvachos, any woman who wasn't nevelas, even if she was older, we should be able to keep them as avadim u'shvachos. Zok the Gemara kidirafuna. The reason why you can't even keep them as avadim u'shvachos if they're over 3 years old, even if they were not nevelas, is because of Rav Huna tells us that it's not totally if the woman was nevelas or not. It's totally if the woman is royal labia or not. The Rav Huna had a steer in the psukim. Ksivit says, "Kol isha yoidas ish u'lemishkav zacher harayu." This is speaking about adult women. Any adult woman who had bia already, that's a woman you have to kill. Ha'en yodas. If you don't know, or not if you don't know, if she didn't have relations with a man, if she never had bia, kaimu. That means it's masha for the pasuk that even an adult woman who you know for a fact didn't have bia. How you know, the Gemara will deal with later. But if you have a woman who you know for a fact didn't have bia, it's mashma you don't have to kill her. Mechalal, that half ben yodu ben lo yodu kaimu. If there's only a distinction between, if the Torah says even an adult woman, there's a distinction if she had bia or not. It would be mashma that a half the younger children, even if you knew they had bia, they'd be allowed. Because there's the pasuk makes a distinction between an adult woman and a young woman. And the pasuk says by an adult woman, it's tough if it's yadu mishkavei zach. Mashma that a minor child, even if it was yadu mishkavei zach, it would still be mutter. But the problem is the pasuk doesn't say that. Uksiv by a taf it says as well. Meaning, if you had a young child that had bia, you'd also kill it. So it's a stira. It's a stira. So what the pasuk must be saying is an older woman, whether or not she had bia or not, since she's royal to have bia, you're going to kill her. A ketana, since she's not royal to have bia, you'll keep them alive. The Torah is talking about a certain age. Once a woman reaches a certain age, the Torah is saying that you have to kill them from the Majonim. Maybe only a woman who was nivela, you have to kill her. But if she wasn't nivela, you don't have to kill her. When it says in the Torah, the chol hataf banoshim, asher lo yodu mishkav zacher, hava oimer, beru'uya liboyel, hakosef medaber. It must be that it's beru'uya liboyel, hakosef medaber, because of this theory that we asked. Because you could ask the kasha, it says the chol hataf banoshim, asher lo yodu mishkav zacher, there you keep. You could be medaik, mashma older women, even if it was lo yodu mishkav zacher, you should kill them. But the pasuk doesn't say that. So you see the pasuk are making a distinction between an age. Royally boiled, you kill. Less than royally boiled, lower age than royally boiled, you don't. So effectively, how do you know if a woman's royally boiled? How in the world are you going to know on each woman if you should kill her or not if she's royally boiled? You know what they did? Tzitz. They took all of these captive women and they walked them by the tzitz. The tzitz is mechaper on nose. So that's why it was the tzitz that was used. If her face turned green when she passed by the tzitz, but you do she really boiled. Then you know she's really boiled. If her face didn't turn green, but you do she ain't really boiled, and they kept her alive. Someone who does averis gets a droikin, which makes his complexion green. It says, here was a story when Klal Yisrael ganged up on Shevet Binyamin to kill them out because of the story of Pilegesh Begiva. A woman in Giva got gang raped and died from the gang rape. and Klal Yisrael wanted Binyamin to give up the perpetrators, and Binyamin protected the perpetrators. So because of that, Klal Yisrael went and wiped out all of Shevet Binyamin, and they said that nobody's allowed to marry anyone from Shevet Binyamin. They were almost destroying her. But then what happened was Klal Yisrael said, everybody has to come join us in this fight against Binyamin. And the Yosy Yevamos Gilad did not join. Because of that, they went afterwards and they killed out the anti-Yevamos Gilad as well, because they didn't come to help Klal Yisrael attack Binyamin. Now they had a whole bunch of women left over from Yosy Yevamos Gilad. So what did they do? The women, Asher Lo Yodu Ishkul Mishkav Zachar, those women, they let him stay alive. And those women, they let marry the men that were left over from Binyamin. So the question is, Yodi, how did they know when they were assessing the Yosy Yevamos Gilad, which women were with Yodi Mishkav Isha, which ones weren't? Amar Kana, what they did was Hayshivum al Pichavish Shal Yayin. They made the woman stand over an open barrel of wine. Be'ula, if she was a Be'ula, there's like an open passage through her, in between her legs, up to her mouth. Reichanoidet. You would smell the aroma of the wine coming out of her mouth. Besula, who's closed, ain't reichanoidet. So that's how they knew. Frank the Gemara, why didn't they use the same solution they used years ago? Put them in front of the tzitz. V'navrina l'fnei tzitz. Zok Gemara, Amar of Kana Bered of Nasan, l'rotzen lahem ksiv, l'rotzen v'loiv l'peronis. We don't want to use the tzitz to kill somebody, to decide who's getting killed and who's not. Therefore, they use the wine barrel. There they were using the tzitz to decide who lives and who dies. Amar Ravashi, lahem ksiv, lahem for Klal Yisrael, l'rotzen v'loiv l'peronis. And the women from Yevamos Gilad were Jewish women. But when you talk about the Mejonim, then Afilu Leperanis will even use the tzitz to make a determination on them, Leperanis.
I wonder why they.
We'll stop here.
I wonder why the doctor used the tzitz. Why the barrel of wine was fine, then why use the tzitz? Leave the tzitz alone.
That's a very good question. I wonder how many barrels of wine they had available in the middle.